So the Wood Products Council started an educational initiative called Woodworks. The goal was to give the industry a one-stop shop for any general question you had toward wood as it related to commercial construction or multifamily construction, because we long knew that residential had always been built with wood, but we started to see it coming into the commercial side of the world, but there were questions and there were challenges that had long been forgotten or had not been yet discovered. So rather than having to surf through the internet, we're human. We take the path of least resistance. So if you were challenged with trying to design with wood because your client was saying it's going to be more cost effective, you would simply look and give up. No, it's got to be steel or it's got to be concrete. So the demand was there. So this started about 8 years ago now. As a pilot program, it started in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. We benchmark what the approach toward wood was, not only from an overall viewpoint from the industry, but we actually took data looking at the number of buildings within commercial multifamily using wood compared to steel or concrete. We did that for 3 years as a pilot program, sponsored by Canadian money for the most part. And then after 3 years, we looked at the data and it showed that we had a great impact. So now it's nationwide. It's no longer a pilot program. It's a full-on initiative. And I'm happy to be a part of that. I covered the Southeast. I've got the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee. Supposed to have Kentucky. I haven't made it up there a whole lot. But I have counterparts down in Florida and up in D.C. and we're spread across the nation now. So our goal is to help anybody with any given question you may have toward that. Our funding comes from three major sources right now. Our largest one is the softwood lumber industry. The Softwood Lumber Board has a checkoff program, or there's a checkoff program within the softwood lumber industry, and many of you are aware of it. We're very happy and very gracious to have that. We hope that continues, and that helps us a whole lot. USDA and the Forest Service, because as we all know, most of you here, and it's always good to have foresters. I don't get that privilege a lot of times. You guys know it's a crop, and the USDA fully supports what you do. Natural Resources Canada, because it still is a trade investment. There's still a lot of wood that comes over the border that may not be what you want to hear, particularly if you're a forester here, but it is a reality, and they look at that. Forestry Innovation and Investment, or FII, does a lot of research toward product development, product application. You'll see a couple of studies I'm going to refer to in here that FII has done, and they continue to fund us as well. And here's what we do. Basically, I offer project support and technical assistance, and I say I have a whole team behind me, and I have partner associations such as Paul and others within AWC. We work with APA and others, but schools, and we're going to talk a lot about schools today. Midrise and multifamily. Now, I know you guys haven't seen any of that coming up around here, have you? I'll say probably 9 out of 10 projects I consult on are 4- and 5-story multifamily. Greenville's a hot spot, obviously, as is every other city in the state right now. It kind of started with Greenville, but we're starting to see Charleston really pick up the pace. Even Spartanburg, some of the smaller cities that border all that, what we would call Tier B cities, are really starting to see multifamily pop up. Commercial, corporate, franchise, retail, all of that's going to follow behind that. We've seen that around here. And we see South Carolina is very fortunate because you continue to see a population inflow, which means for our particular industry that we're all in, that's good. That means we have a demand and we're needed. So that's really good to see. Institutional recreation, healthcare, all that continues to grow here. If you have questions related to any of these and any of your projects, general or otherwise, let me know. We also host the U.S. Wood Design Awards. This is a great event we have every year. Last year we had over 300 submissions. You can see the 7 different categories here. Nominations for that are open June 1st. They typically go through the end of September. They're free. If you know of a project or if you've worked on a project that you think fits into any of these, you can submit to any one or all of them if you'd like. We encourage you to do that. So let's kind of dig into this a little bit. The common need-based construction in South Carolina, and I'm just skimming the top of the iceberg here. There's a whole lot more than this, but what I really wanted to focus on today, particularly as it applies to state construction, local government. We need office space, libraries, emergency services, higher education, student housing, student service buildings, amenities, Public schools in particular. If we've got all this inflow of people, that means an inflow of children. So we expect that to grow as well. So there's new construction there, obviously, and then we've got expansion and additions. So why consider the wood? Why not just keep it the way we've always done it? Well, there's 4 bullets that I really want to focus on today. The first one is enhance the interior environment. We're going to talk a little bit about that, some study that has been done, and we'll look at that in greater detail. We want to minimize upfront costs, which is huge, particularly when you're challenged. Now, we've got all the population coming in. The challenge with that is the tax base doesn't instantly catch up. It takes a little bit. So we've got to minimize those upfront costs. We also have to reduce the long-term costs. We'll look at how wood construction can help do that. We've got to encourage pride in the local community. If you've got a structure, and this is a great example right here. Now, darn it, it's not wood, but you know, sometimes wood just doesn't fit for what you're trying to do. But this is something that the community is proud of. This has become a hinge point for the center of downtown. And if you've got any building that does that, it tends to hang around for a while. We're going to look at some examples today of that. Now, I mentioned enhancing the interior environment. This has long been done. Now, you're going to see a lot of illustrations today from British Columbia and Canada because they have long embraced this concept where they're using wood for the interior environment. It gives a calming and soothing effect. They do it within their healthcare facilities up there in their schools. The Japanese have done it in their school systems for a long time. And there's a great study that was done recently. The University of British Columbia and FP Innovations did this study. They created 4 environments, exactly alike, with and without wood, with and without plants. They took 119 students, and they were looking at the effects of wood finishes in plant study. Now, the way they did this is they monitored the sympathetic nervous system. So looking at heart rate, skin conductivity, measuring this basically in real time as these stresses are applied to the students. So they had 3 periods, waiting in the room, taking an audio math test, and then the recovery alone after the test. So here's the examples of the rooms. 4 identical rooms, slight changes with plants or without, with wood or without. Other than that, they are identical. So they stuck these 119 students in there, and what they found that stress, as measured by the sympathetic nervous system, was lower in the wood room in all periods of the study. It has a calming effect. And if the students are calm, they tend to learn more. If you're working in a hostile environment, well, hostile is probably not the right word, stressful environment, that can help. And I can tell you, I work from home, so usually there's this mass of paper around me and there's a radio. But you know what? There is wood. My office is covered with wood, whether it be samples, my desk, the couch behind me, the table, whatever it may be. I like it. Most of us do like it. And if you look even in a building like this, you'll notice we have wood elements scattered throughout. It does give a calming effect. Here's an example of an elementary school, or an early childhood center, I should say. You can see the exposed wood along the same concept. More in the hallway. Now you'll see the unique structure there. Various elements, what we would call a hybrid or a pin truss. They're leaving those exposed. This is another school in Crawford Bay, British Columbia. And you'll see not only do they use the wood, but they're also introducing daylight. And this is important within these. So daylighting and ventilation is all part of embracing the concept of a better interior environment. Wood construction does this quite well. These are some great examples of that, where you can see tall elements within the walls, keeping the wood theme, but you're letting that natural light in. Even a gymnasium. A couple more examples. Now I like this one. This was actually local for us. I'll say local. It's in the southeast. This is actually outside of Duke University. Now it's not associated with the university. This is a private school. This is Duke Lower and Middle School, so they're both combined in the same location. In Durham, right on the edge of the Duke Forest. This was completed in 2009, DTW Architects and Planners, and you'll see that there's common elements here. There's nothing unique about the structure. There's some custom arches there, glue lamps, tongue and groove ceiling, And you'll notice the amount of wood that you're seeing beyond what's just in the structure. And look at the daylighting in that. Now, I wish my school, when I was that age, looked like that. I remember dark, horribly, this is the worst color blue I've ever seen in my life. It's etched into my brain. If I have a nightmare, it's that color of blue somewhere. And it was dark. It wasn't this appealing construction. And the kids take pride in this. I've toured this facility, actually, and the kids love it. When there's that embrace and there's that love of the structure itself, you tend to get better care taken of it. Now, the joke's always been with any given school that, you know, the kids, the first thing they do is find a place to carve their initials. You'll notice that some of those elements are kept high, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. This is a private school where the kids, honestly, are better behaved. Here's the exterior. This is another example, again out of British Columbia. You'll see tall glue-lam elements in the walls. A lot of daylighting, but a good mix. All right, so why? We see that part. We've seen the enhancing the interior, but how about minimizing the upfront costs? Those look like expensive structures. So how are they doing this and saving money? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So again, let me see how many architects we have again. Dustin Razor's really high. So we've got some architects. So for those of you who are not architects, and again, I'm not going to dig into the code very deeply, this is the cursed table 503. Anytime an architect gets a project that comes in the door, the first thing they have to look at is how big is my building and what's it being used for. Now, over on the far left, these are occupancies, and the occupancies are broken down. So R2, for example, is multifamily. This would be student housing. S is parking and so on, and this list goes further down. There's assembly, A, and some others. But you can see this table basically breaks down the number of stories and height that you can go, and then the area per level in square foot. So you can see for an R2 building, if I start all the way over here at the right, I can go 2 stories, 7,000 square feet per level. You'll notice these are different building types, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Type 5 is a very basic wood building. You can use any particular element within that. Type 4 is heavy timber, or HT, meaning that you have to have a certain cross section that's thick enough so that in a fire, we know it's very predictable. We know the rate of char within a large wood member. So if we know that predictable rate after an hour of exposure, we know what's going to be left within the cross section of that particular beam or column, and that's how heavy timber is designed. Type 3 means that it's a wood construction within, non-combustible for the exterior walls. Now, non-combustible can also include fire retardant treated wood. This is what you're seeing, these large 5-story apartment complexes. Those are being built with Type 3. Type 2 is non-combustible elements. Type 1 also is non-combustible elements. And you'll notice that the square footage is high, it goes up, as does the height. These are unlimited. If you go to Type 1, that's a stadium, basically, or a large skyscraper. So by default, you would say, well, if I've got these different building types, why would I try to wrestle it under one of these? Why not just go over here? Well, there's a cost associated with that. There's also different building elements. That basically, you cannot use wood there. That's non-combustible. Now, a lot of architects, and shame on you guys for the ones that will admit it, default to Type 2 construction. Type 2 typically is light gauge steel, concrete, even heavy steel, but that's not what we, with our industry, are really hoping for here. This is the areas we're aiming at. But you'll notice the square footage and the heights can drop. Now, this is a tabular value. When you add sprinklers, when you have what we call open frontage where the fire equipment can get in, these can grow a great deal, and I'm not going to dig into that today. But what I want to do is try to focus taking our projects from here to this side of table 503. This is Type 2, meaning that it's non-combustible throughout. But you'll notice if you look at the roof, It's actually all wood. There are provisions within the code, particularly with type 2, that if you're high enough off of the floor, that you can utilize wood in the roof system. The reason being, fire starts down here. If it's that high, inherently the fire is not going to jump right up into the roof system. And you'll notice that's heavy. That's a heavy timber type application anyway, so it's going to have some resistance to fire as it chars and insulates itself. But I want to look at this right here. If I look at R2, which would apply to student housing, you'll notice that type 2, let's just focus on the A. Type 2A, I can go 4 stories and 24,000 square feet. Type 3A, I can do the exact same thing, and you'll notice 2B and 3B are exactly the same as well. So you can see that there's a lot of similarities between these two different building types with the advantage of using either one. And you'll notice that a lot of these are the same. It doesn't matter what the occupancy is. They're very close. They're not always exact, but they're pretty darn close between type 2 and type 3 construction. So why does that matter? Well, the cost. This is an average. Now this comes from the ICC. I know a lot of you are painfully aware of the ICC. That's part of what you do every day. ICC publishes some great data every 6 months. It comes out in February and it comes out in August. And it's the ICC valuation data. And what they do is they take every occupancy, and I'm just listing 3 of them here, and they go through every building type or every type of construction, and they have an average cost per square foot. Now this is a national average. Now any 2 buildings, they could be the same side by side depending on detailing, layout, structural design. There's a variety of things that come into play, but this is a national average. So if we look, I've got 3 occupancies that we would tend to deal with in the projects we're talking about today. So you've got A3, which would be assembly, such as libraries. And you can see the cost per square foot average. Now this doesn't include the civil or the land here. This is just the structure itself. R2, which would be student housing, and then E, occupancy for education. And you can see if we defaulted to type 2 every time, there's a far greater cost per square foot. And if we break that down a little bit and try to keep it to the right where that structural wood is allowed within the design, here's some example savings of that. So A3 assembly, we're saving 21 bucks a square foot. R2, we're saving $20 a square foot. Now again, this is a national average. It's not exact. This is just a thumbnail look at the different construction types. And education, almost $20 a foot as well. Now student housing could be 200,000 square feet, easily. Let's just say it's 100,000 square feet. Right there, you can see, you multiply that by 20, that's a huge savings. Huge savings. Education, again, if you've got 1,000 square feet plus 10,000 square feet, you're going to see a substantial savings. And then look at 2B and 5A, which often are pretty close in capacities as well, and the savings are even greater. So that's the goal, is to try to get it to the right of that. And that can be challenging for architects and engineers to make all that work. I'm going to put up a lot of public school projects up here so you can see that. Now this is an example. This is in Hot Springs, Arkansas. This is the Fountain Lake Middle School. They save $40 a square foot. And a lot of times when you say a wood school, the general public conceives the old wooden schoolhouse. And you'll see that a lot of these are not the wooden schoolhouses that come to mind. These are grand, beautiful projects that really embrace the design. The construction here is pretty common to what we see in the area. Wood studs, plated trusses. The initial steel and masonry estimate for this project was 150 bucks a square foot. The wood framing cost 107. They saved $2 million on this project. That is substantial for any school district, regardless of scale. This is another one. I believe this is near Memphis. Now, this particular architect attended one of our events, looked at how we showed some schools around the nation. This is a pretty sizable school, 71,000 square feet. They knocked out some costs, $10 a square foot. You can see it under construction. This is the Newport Elementary School. 124,000 square feet, which would be a more reasonable size for a school here in South Carolina, particularly in this area. $30 a square foot saving there, according to the architect. $20 a square foot were attributed to the wood construction itself. This is type 5B, so it was to the far right of that table 503 we looked at. Now I'm going to jump. We're going to go all the way to the other side of the country, as far as you could literally go just about, to the Bethel School District, which is in Pierce County. Now it's just right outside of Tacoma, if that gives you a good example. The Bethel School District has 23 facilities within their district. All of them use wood construction. And what I want to talk about is we looked at the upfront costs, but I want to look at those long-term costs and the savings that go with wood construction. And schools, public schools in general, are a great example of this. 81% of their schools meet the ENERGY STAR rating. Now that, for those of you within the school system, or if you're familiar with the ENERGY STAR rating system, that's hard to hit. And that is phenomenal that they can get 81% of their schools to do that. So within the Bethel School District, you'll see the wood applications. It's not always exposed. Typically in these pictures, you don't see a lot of wood exposed. You see some heavy timber trusses up top, but you'll notice everything else looks like any other school for the most part. This is from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction from their 2011 and 12 budgets in Washington State. And this breaks down the different school districts. Now these are for schools that have 15 to 20,000 students full-time, or districts I should say, that have regularly 15 to 20,000 students full-time. And if you break those down and you look, FTE means full-time equivalent. So if it ran all year, because some of the schools go all year, some don't. So they're averaging these to a full-time equivalent. And you see what they've saved. Now, those particular schools in the Bethel School District knocked down their electricity consumption, and that's from 2004 to 2011. So it makes the number look a lot bigger, but it's still substantial. Saved $4.3 million in utility costs. $4.3 million, again, regardless of the size of the school district, is substantial savings when you look at something like this. Well, how did they do this? Well, a lot of what they're doing is they're using wood to save money on the initial upfront cost, and it allows them to invest in better energy efficient designs, mechanical systems, insulation, and so on. This particular school here is the Thompson Elementary School within the Bethel School District, and the GC said that just based on using wood, they save 30% on the installed insulation cost. The reason being because wood tends to be a natural insulator. Now it still conducts, but it conducts at a far lower rate than what you're going to see from a steel stud or concrete. And that's part of the necessary evils of having construction, is sometimes we have to have that. But if you can minimize it, which is what they're doing, you can knock some of that cost out and you can reinvest it into other parts of the project. With this particular project, they're using 12-inch deep LSL studs, so laminated strand lumber. So rather than a 2x4 or 2x6 is what we're using pretty much everywhere now, they're going to a 12-inch deep, which means they're filling that full of insulation. They get an enhanced R value out of that. That relates to better energy efficiency. The mechanical systems have to run less. So there is substantial savings in that. This one you can see is not cheap. It was $187 a square foot. But again, they're going to continually gain from that throughout the life of this structure. This is another one, Clover Creek Elementary. Again, you see it was close to $200 a square foot, but a beautiful project. Not a lot of exposed wood. You'll see some there in the entryway. And as I recall, I read the history of this. I believe that entryway came off of the old school building that it replaced. They reused it. A smaller one, Bethel Learning Center. This is only 5,500 square feet. This one's unique because it's built near a gas pipeline, and they designed it to be blast resistant. Now, we have military bases here. And if you're familiar at all with anything that goes around the military base, there are blast requirements that you have to meet with any structure that's going to be occupied or contain critical elements. They designed this with studs at 8 inches on center using wood to enhance the blast resistance. Now, there was a joke for a long time. If you were an engineer and you were familiar with these types of projects on a military base, at one point they started putting blast resistant windows everywhere, and they said if there's going to be a bomb, stand in front of the window, because the rest of it we can't guarantee. They've started changing that, and so some of the designs now are embracing that. Cross-laminated timber has great potential for this. Nelson Elementary, again, pretty considerable cost here. But one of the things they talk about out in the Bethel School District, and one of the concerns that a lot of school districts have, is maintenance. Because the perception, or rather I should say the misperception of wood is it's not durable. And one of the things they talk about is if we use concrete here in the Bethel School District, one, we've got to waterproof it. Two, we have to put graffiti-resistant paint on top of it. That's $180 a square, $180 a gallon. They say with wood, it's $30 a gallon. We just paint it. And we're going to repaint this in 15 years just like we would the CMU. So really, even when we look at maintenance of it and think about where this is at the Pacific rainforest, I call it up there. They get close to, 150, 200 inches of rain a year? It's considerable. And they can maintain it there. They can make it work. It's all within good design and good application to maintain the project. This is a study done up in Minneapolis. This is looking at service life and durability of structure. So this is a number of demolished structures in Minneapolis over a year's time. And you'll notice the age range of when these projects were deconstructed or demolished. So if they were 25 years or less, only 12 of them, 26 to 50 years in age, you'll see the majority of them there, 47 torn down, 50 to 75, 75 and so on, you see the thing. The challenge here, and what I want to point out is the average service life of a commercial building used to be about 20 years. It started to change because now we're looking at things more sustainably. Why throw something away if we can redevelop it and reuse it? But what I want to point out is wood construction has this misperception that it doesn't last. And if you ask the average GC, the general contractor, and say, what is the life expectancy of a wood building? They say, 20 years. Because they tear them down in 20 years. It has nothing to do with the durability of it. It has to do with socioeconomic reasons. You can watch any given area where there's hotels, and you can watch it within about 20 years. That's not the hot spot anymore. They all move to the other side of the interstate. And what happens to those? They hang around, they eventually get torn down. You can drive down any interstate and see areas where it used to be a hotel hotspot, and they move around. Schools, retail does all the same thing. Eventually it may come back around, but we tend to see the service life of these buildings in that 26 to 50 year range. Wood can easily handle that. And if you look at those buildings that they tore down, this is what they were composed of. Concrete and blue, steel and gray, and wood and brown. And you'll notice that until you get up to about 100 years, the majority of those structures, well, 50 years I'll say, the majority of those structures were not wood. The durability is not the issue, it's the application of it and getting the public to embrace the concept. Here's another great project. This is out in Arizona. Now this is a unique climate because it tends to be hot. Smaller school, it is a lead school, 6,200 square feet. This actually has won numerous awards because of its efficiency. And the same thing, they're using wood construction, they're enhancing the insulation capacity of it, and using some of those cost savings to apply toward better energy reductions. 17.5% reduction in the first year, up to 35% now because they're honing in. A lot of these systems you have to hone in a little bit. They've got an overall Energy Star rating of 87 and recognized 2 consecutive years. Now we talked about new construction. Within this state particularly, if you get into a historic town where Greenville is actually growing, it's new, it's vibrant, you go into Columbia or you go into Charleston particularly, there's a lot of old construction. And we don't need to get rid of that. Sometimes we just need to redevelop it. Now this is a great project. This is up in Minneapolis, and every time I go up there I swear I'm going to go see this thing and I never get around to it. This is called the Butler Brothers building. Now, this is 9 stories tall, 500,000 square feet. This is all wood. Now it has a brick facade on it, but this is a wood constructed project. How many of you remember the Benjamin Franklin stores? Anybody? A few of you? Long time ago, this was actually their vertical warehouse. Sears Roebuck had one down in Atlanta. It was the same concept, but it was concrete. This one's actually wood, built early 1900s. There's another picture. They redeveloped this in the 70s. They took the center of it out. It was so big and so vast that if you got into the center of it, they said it was like a cave. It was too dark. Nobody wanted to be in it. So when they converted it to office space, they actually took the center out of it. And so it has this large multi-story atrium. Literally has a glider, a real life-size glider hanging in the middle of it, in the picture I have. Beautiful, beautiful project. And it's a great example of wood construction and how it holds up over time. This is actually up in Pennsylvania. This was a hospital, and they repurposed it to utilize it for student housing. So almost 200,000 square feet of renovation, and then they added onto it as well. And you can see this is the finished picture here. And you get a bit of the history just by looking at the picture of it. You can see on the back what they've added on. Built in 1872 originally. Some of the pictures under construction. Now the lower level is concrete, but up above that you'll see wood construction. And you can see it if you look where they're tearing away some of the old, it's hard to see on this screen, but you can see heavy timber frames in there, gorgeous timber frames. Large trusses up in the roof. Now those are not 2x. This is all wood. It's still usable after over 100 years. There's the finished product. So we have a lot of buildings within our state where we may not necessarily need to go in and tear them down, particularly if they're wood. Maybe they just need to be repurposed. There's a lot of good engineers in this state that can show you the ways to do that. Now, I talked about the wow factor. So we've looked at long-term costs, and the last bullet I want to talk about is encouraging pride in our buildings. If it's a special building, it becomes special to people, and it tends to stay there for a long time. How many of you, your high school still exists? Few, some not, you may not know. Mine barely exists. These things don't last forever, but if your high school was special, if it was uniquely built, if it has a good look to it, if it's historic in any aspect, they keep it, they maintain it. And this is something that they talk about a lot in these new projects. Now, I'm going to show you kind of the upper echelon of wood construction. This is the El Dorado School, however you want to say it, in Arkansas. Dunn was the, I believe he is the school facility director there. And this is one of his points. They have a dropout issue. We all have a dropout issue within our schools. And part of it is nobody wants to go to school. If you go to that horrible, ugly blue school I went to, that's not where I wanted to be. And I noticed, I can remember, there was a lobby where it was all glass, and that's where we all went. You ran to your locker down that dark dungeon of a hallway, you grabbed your stuff, came out of the concrete blocks, and you came into the lobby where there was glass and there was wood seats. That was the place you wanted to be, and you hung out there even after school was done. So if there's something that the students find prideful or they enjoy being there, they'll tend to stay in school. So this is the front of that El Dorado High School. Keep in mind that in Arkansas, they didn't have the ability to build with wood. In 2008, they passed a law saying that you could utilize wood in school construction, matching the International Building Code. So $134 a square foot. This looks like any other school until you walk inside. $60 million budget. They saved $2.7 million changing over to wood construction. And you see they're using common sense. Now, this is a public school. They're not using wood down here. They're using brick where they can't carve their initials in it. There's common sense applications. And you'll notice the block on the first level. This is pretty neat. This is actually their arena. Now, this is a sizable school. 30,000 square foot just for the arena, seats over 2,200 people. Now, look in the roof there. They changed those from steel to wood, and they saved $60,000. Those are 165-foot spans, 20 foot deep, and a much better looking gym than the one I grew up in, I can guarantee you that. There's also sustainable benefits when we talk about carbon sequestration. Now, having a lot of people here from the forest industry, you know already that half of the weight of wood is basically carbon, 49 to 50% depending on species. If we know the carbon, we know how much carbon dioxide has been brought in, sequestered in the form of carbon, and the rest is released as oxygen. If you look at this particular school, over 4,300 cubic meters of wood used in it. We grow that much wood in North America in 13 minutes. Part of the perception or the misperceptions we fight within the public is that if you're using wood, you're ruining our forests. And we all know that's not the case. You show examples like this, we grow this much wood in 13 minutes. It's easily sustainable and very replenishable. The carbon stored here, you can see that in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And then the greenhouse gases. So if you put this into what the public understands, in fossil fuel consumption and the carbon output, that's equivalent to 2,100 cars off the road for a year, or enough energy to operate a home for 970 years. That's what the public understands right there. Another large school up in British Columbia again, 84,000 square feet. This is the first CLT school, and this was actually built up in Franklin, West Virginia. This uses cross-laminated timber for the walls and the roof, and I believe in the floor as well on the second level. This is actually overseas. This is in Norwich. This is using CLT as well, but you'll notice the roof. So even if you didn't use CLT, and you'll see it in the walls in the bottom left there, but you'll look in that open area, they're still utilizing wood for the roof, and that's probably the easiest place we could implement it into our schools is in the roof systems, quite easily. This is an office project. This is actually down in Wilmington. Live Oak Bank headquarters. This is all wood design. Beautiful project. This is a ranger station in California. But it could be any general administrative government building. This is Stapleton Library up in New York. Notice the wood roof, the wood glue lamps in some of the wall. This is actually the dining hall at UNC Greensboro. There's actually, I believe, 5 buildings that come together at perfect angles, and they wanted to tie them all together, and you'll notice the roof there. This is a wonderful, wonderful project if you ever get the chance to look at it. And I hate that the designers aren't here today, but absolutely gorgeous. And now this is the hot focal point of 5 old masonry buildings that really just looked out of place. And so now they have a new focal point and gathering area. This is student housing, University of Washington. You'll notice this is all brick on the exterior, atop a wood wall. This is large. 668,000 gross square feet, 1,700 beds. These are 3 halls, 2 apartment buildings, covers 4 city blocks, all of it wood. Well, I'll be here for a while. If you guys have any questions at all, please let me know. Don't hesitate to contact me as it relates to any type of commercial or multifamily design. Any wood question at all, honestly, I'll take. So thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, Pat. Hope you guys enjoy your day, and look forward to hearing from you.